Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Cabinet Vision Guy. In today's episode we're going to continue our series on JavaScript and we're going to introduce a little bit more intelligence to our JavaScript UCS for managing side fillers. And what we're going to do today is we're going to add some support for different end panel types. Currently our UCS only supports unfinished ends, and that's probably where this is going to be used most commonly in conjunction with an unfinished end going up to a wall. But there's also several scenarios where I've used a side filler in conjunction with a finished end. That might be when I set the side filler back, so I've got a slight part of an exposed end on the left or right hand side. But I'd like this to work with a finished end and an applied finished end as well. So at the moment, if I just right click on my assembly and select finished ends, you'll see that our side filler disappears. And we've actually got a little bit of logic in our UCS at the moment to give us an error message if we choose to, if we're not using the right end panel type. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to head into my UCS and just take a look at the code and take a look at what we've got at the moment. I'm going to focus on the left end panel to begin with, and then the modifications that I make I'll probably just copy over to the right hand side. So at the moment I can see that I'm getting my left end and I'm using this .find assembly, and what I'm doing is I'm providing a hard-coded path that returns me my left end object. And what I need to do here is I need to provide some logic to make sure I'm taking into account for the left finished end as well and returning the object in that instance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to head up to the top of my UCS and I'm going to start up here. And I'm going to create a couple of different variables up at the top. And I'm going to make those string variables, so I'm going to call this one left end. And I'm just going to call this one str. And by default, what I'd like this to do is get the unfinished end, I think. So I'm going to come down here and copy this. And actually, I'm going to do this the other way around. I'm going to have it get the left finished end by default. And then what I'm going to do down here is I'm going to include an if statement. And I'm going to query the assembly. Again, this UCS is working on cabinet level, so it's for each cabinet assembly. And I'm going to evaluate a parameter, and I'm going to head over to the help file. And the parameter that I'm going to evaluate is lend or rend. Lend and rend return us the end panel type. So what I want to do is I want to check and see if this end panel type is number 2, which is an unfinished end. And then what I want to do on my next one, I'm going to use rend, which is obviously the right end type. So if I just head into here. Now what this is saying is if this .evaluate lend equals 2, so if this has got an unfinished end, and now at this point what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this section in here. And I'm going to change this to left unfinished. So by default, my string that is going to reference my end panel when I get this assembly is going to be looking for a finished end. And then if I'm using an unfinished end, it's going to automatically change to look for an unfinished end. And the reason I'm doing it this way is if I just head down to my code, you'll see that when I get my left end type, at the moment again it's hard coded, but I then check and see if it's null. And I've got the option down here just to throw an error message for my user and then stop the UCS to say we don't support this end panel type. So what I want to do is I want to have my UCS support left finished ends or finished ends and applied finished ends. But if the user tries to use something like an applied finished door, at that point what I want to do is just provide an error message and say that this is an unsupported end panel type. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this and I'm going to head down here and I'm going to use it in this section here. So what we're going to do is we get in the left end object. So we're doing left end equals this dot find assembly. And now we're using our string. And I want to make a couple of changes to the logic down here as well. So what we're doing is we're actually getting the end panel, and then we're checking to see if our attribute has been set to see where, if we want a filler on the left hand side or on the right hand side. And what I think I want to do is change this over. So if I just copy this out of here, or cut this out of here, I'm going to move this above. So the first thing I'm going to do is check that my attribute is set. So it gives me the option of setting left, obviously, or both for my filler side. And then at that point, I'm going to get my end panel and then check if my end panel is null. I'm then going to run through my code. So what I need to do is I need to swap this out down here where I'm removing my parameter, and I'm just going to copy in my error message as well. So what this is going to do now is it's just going to check for me the filler side. So is it set to left or is it set to both? Then it's going to get the left end object and check if it's null. If it is null, it'll then come down to this section. Again, this is currently commented out, but we're going to enable this. So we'll just do that now. And then else it's just going to remove my parameter, and I think that is this parameter here, yeah, for my left filler width. Now if I just have a look, I'm going to make a quick check over of my code for a second and see what we've got. Okay, so I can see one error I've put in there, so evaluate, there we go. Right, if I head out, there we go. So what we now see is with a finished end applied, we still get our end panel as expected. If I just head down to assembly level, now what I can do with this now is I can highlight where I haven't got any intelligence. So I'm just going to move my end panel over to the left hand side, and you'll see that as soon as I do that, it highlights where we've got something hard coded with the actual position of the filler itself. So I'd like to make that a little bit more intelligent as well while I'm here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move this end panel back into position, remove the override, and I'm just going to head up to utilities and back into my UCS. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to find the area where I'm setting the position, and we can see here what I'm doing for the filler, the left filler X position. At the moment I'm just using minus the width of the filler itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some intelligence to this one, and I'm going to make it the left filler X position, I think, to start with. And I'm going to minus the filler width from that as well. So I'm just going to use left filler.dx. I could use the left filler width parameter, in fact I will do. There we go. And I also think I'm probably going to need to take into account the thickness of the end panel, but we'll see. Yeah, we do. So that's moved it into the position, but what we haven't done is accounted for the thickness. So I'm just going to go back to my UCS. And I'm going to just bracket this for a second and grab the left end DZ. And this is where I find JavaScript really useful, is being able to just reference other objects and get the properties from them. So this now says we're using the left end X position minus the filler width, minus, or the filler width, sorry, add the DZ of the finished end panel, and that puts it in the correct position for us. Now the reason we've added that little bit of intelligence there is now if we're using an applied end, what we can do is in our assembly wizard, we may have different situations where instead of having the applied end be part of the assembly, this may be set to being external to the assembly. So if I just run through my wizard, I should have an option in here. There we go. So if I just select that I want my finished end panels to be on the outside of my assembly, that still moves into the correct position for us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to replicate this for the right hand side. So I'm going to go back into my UCS, and we're about to see quite a bit of copying and pasting. So I'm going to copy and paste this whole block down here and literally just change this to right. Instead of LF, obviously I'm going to go for right finished end, and instead of lend, I'm going to go for rend, and then right unfinished. And I'm obviously going to change the string as well. Now what I need to do is just come down to this section. I'll grab this one. And I'll change this one first. And I'll make sure that I'm making the same modifications to my logic as well. So I'm going to copy this one above. There we go, I think that's the same. Let me just check it over and make sure I haven't made any mistakes. I think that's correct. So if we just head out of here now. No, in fact, it's not, obviously. I need to add some intelligence in for the position. So for this one, what I want to do is I want to take the right end and I'm just going to select the X position of the right end and see what that gives me at the moment. Yeah, so on this one as well, I need to take into account just the thickness of the right end. So if I go back into my UCS. And again, the reason this is important is in the next episode, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be deciding how these two parts are connected and which one's going to be overlapping the other one. So if I add this in here. And the last bit of intelligence that we're going to add for this episode is just to manage the Z position of each filler part. So currently, I think we've got this probably hard coded to being the assembly depth, probably less the depth of the filler, yeah, the thickness of the filler. So what we need to do on this one is just make a consideration, I think, for the width of the end panel probably, and also the Z position of the end panel, depending on whether we're dealing with the left or right hand side. So let me just grab this and see where we want to be placing our fillers. So on this one, what we want to do is make sure we're probably using the Z position of the filler, I think, plus the width of the filler. And then on this one, we probably just want to look at using the Z position because our datum's in a slightly different position on this one. So if we just look there. So what I'm going to do on the left hand side, yeah, I'm going to use the Z position plus the width less the depth. And on this one, I'm just going to make it the Z position less the depth to get our position there. So back into our UCS. And I'm going to do the left hand side first. And what I want to start off with is, I think it's the left end Z position, which should return me 0. But if I start to move my end panel away from my assembly or away from the wall, it should move my filler as well. So I'm going to add on the width of the end, and then I'm going to less, I think from that, I'll bracket this up, and I'm going to go with the filler DZ, I think it is. There we go. And then on this one, what I'm going to do is just use the Z position, I think, of the end. And I'm going to take away the right filler DZ from this. And if I just return out and check my assembly. Perfect, everything stayed in the correct position. So let's just give it a little test. If we pick up our end panel and just move this in out, That should also move our filler. Fantastic. And left, right as well. If I just set this to 0, it should move in this direction too. Perfect. And I'll test the right hand side too. So if I just add a couple of inches onto this, there we go, and on this one too. Perfect. I'll just remove my overrides for the next episode. Hopefully you found this episode useful. Feel free to give us a like, share and subscribe. We're also on Facebook. That's facebook.com/thecabinetvisionguy, and Instagram as well. That's instagram.com/thecabinetvisionguy. Cheers.